In 1983, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, Tami woke up on the severely damaged yacht named Hazanya. She was injured, with a wound on her head. Water was flooding the cabin, and everything was a chaotic mess. Panicking, Tami searched desperately for her fiancé, Richard. She shouted his name, but her voice was swallowed by the roaring ocean. The story jumped back 5 months earlier in Tahiti. Tami, a carefree 23-year-old from San Diego, arrived on the island. She soon met Richard, a charming British sailor in his 30s. They quickly fell in love. Richard admired Tami's adventurous spirit, while Tami loved Richard's calmness and confidence. They explored Tahiti together, hiking through lush, dense forests. Eventually, they reached a cliff. Suddenly, Tami took off her shorts and jumped straight into the pristine pool below. Richard was terrified. He shouted Tami's name repeatedly, but there was no response. Immediately, he dropped his backpack and jumped in after her. Richard dove beneath the water, searching desperately. His heart sank as he saw Tami pinned motionless beneath a rock. But just as he swam towards her, Tami suddenly sprang up, swimming swiftly to the surface ahead of him. Seeing Richard so concerned made Tami extremely happy. At that playful moment, neither of them could have imagined the disaster awaiting them. Later, an older couple, friends of Richard, offered him $10,000 and first-class tickets to sail their yacht, Hazanya, from Tahiti to San Diego. Richard eagerly accepted and asked Tami to join him. She hesitated for a moment, but ultimately love won out. She said yes. As the yacht sailed further into deeper waters, the waves grew increasingly violent. Suddenly, a pigeon appeared out of nowhere, landing on their deck, blown in by the strong wind. Tami wondered why a pigeon would fly so far from land into the middle of nowhere, but Richard didn't think much about it and quickly released the bird. Neither of them noticed that the sea was growing rougher, and the yacht was now dangerously tilted. As waves got bigger, Richard began to worry. He asked Tami to steer the boat while he quickly checked the latest weather reports. The broadcast warned that Hurricane Raymond was forming in the Pacific. Richard immediately grabbed his navigation charts, checking how far they were from the storm's center. Fortunately, they were nearly 1,000 miles away. It seemed the hurricane wouldn't reach them, but just to be safe, Tami suggested changing course to avoid the ominous clouds and distant lightning. Richard happily agreed, unaware that this careful decision would soon send them into an unimaginable nightmare. As they adjusted their route, the yacht made a sharp turn. To ensure everything was secure, Richard checked the yacht once more. But by evening, the wind suddenly grew fierce, and the yacht began to rock violently, on the verge of capsizing. Following Richard's instructions, Tami struggled to furl the sails. Richard desperately held onto the sails, fighting to keep them from being torn away by the wind. Tami quickly moved to help, but the storm worsened rapidly. Without warning, a massive wave crashed against the yacht, snapping a mast instantly. To save the remaining masts, Tami bravely pushed through the wind to secure the other sails. Just as she was about to head back, another enormous wave nearly swept her overboard. Luckily, Richard grabbed her just in time, but when they looked up, they saw a terrifying 100-foot wave towering above them. Richard urgently told Tami to take shelter below deck, yet just as she stepped into the cabin, tragedy struck. The yacht, tossed like a tiny leaf, was sucked into the raging storm, tumbling violently through the waves. Richard, badly injured, disappeared into the depths of the ocean. She didn't know how long had passed, but Tami suddenly woke up submerged in water. The cabin was in ruins, and her body was bruised and battered. Ignoring her pain, she desperately looked around. Struggling, she made her way to the deck, but all she saw was endless ocean. Richard was nowhere to be found. Panicking, Tami rushed to the stern, praying as she frantically pulled the safety line, hoping Richard was somehow still attached. But her worst fear quickly became reality. With an anguished scream, she realized she was utterly alone in unknown waters. The devastating pain of losing Richard overwhelmed her. Refusing to give up, Tami grabbed her binoculars, searching the horizon and calling Richard's name. Unable to accept that he was truly gone, she cried and shouted the entire day, but there was still no sign of Richard. Completely hopeless, she finally collapsed, exhausted, falling asleep on the deck. But when she opened her eyes again, she saw something floating in the distance. Quickly grabbing her binoculars, she couldn't believe what she saw. It was Richard! With the yacht unable to move, Tami quickly tied a rope around her waist and jumped fearlessly into the ocean. No matter how violently the waves hit her, Tami bravely swam toward Richard. Just before she ran out of strength, she finally reached him. Overwhelmed with joy to see Richard alive, Tami wrapped one arm tightly around him and used the other to swim back toward the yacht. Feeling Richard's familiar heartbeat, Tami found a renewed determination to survive. Fueled by hope and love, she gathered every ounce of her strength and finally succeeded in getting Richard safely aboard. Although Richard had survived, the deep wound on his leg urgently needed treatment. or he wouldn't make it. Tammy's heart ached seeing him like this, and she quickly jumped into action. She laid Richard down flat, wrapped his wound as best as she could, and stabilized his leg with a wooden board. Richard bravely endured the pain without making a sound, which only made Tammy's heart hurt more. She placed a cushion beneath Richard and did her best to comfort him. With Richard now by her side, Tammy regained her strength. She dug through the debris, found the navigation charts, and carefully planned their route back home. The faster they returned, the sooner Richard could get proper medical help. Next, she went into the cabin to look for supplies. Following Richard's earlier lessons, she managed to repair the water tank. To her relief, the gauge moved again, and fresh, clean water flowed from the tap. With water taken care of, Tammy began searching for food. Soon she returned to the deck, holding a heavy bag in her hands. After gently giving Richard some water, she smiled mischievously and asked him to close his eyes. It was an entire jar of peanut butter. Tammy twisted open the lid, scooped up a big spoonful with her fingers, and fed it to Richard. Seeing Richard's delighted expression, Tammy smiled happily, then scooped another bite for herself. But just as Tammy felt hopeful again, Richard's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. His leg wound began to fester badly, and a high fever set in. There wasn't any medicine aboard, so Tammy desperately applied hand lotion to Richard's face, hoping to bring down his temperature. Unfortunately, it made little difference. If things continued this way, Richard wouldn't last much longer. Tammy couldn't bear the thought of losing Richard again. Maybe God felt her pain. Under Tammy's careful care, Richard's fever broke, and his condition greatly improved. But the situation was becoming desperate. They were down to their last few cans of food. Once these were gone, survival would become even harder. To get protein for Richard and solve their food problem, Tammy bravely jumped into the ocean to catch fish. She carefully targeted a big, plump fish, slowly approaching it with her spear. But just as she lunged forward, the fish swiftly dodged, vanishing without a trace. Running out of air, Tammy surfaced quickly, gasping for breath. Refusing to give up, she dove in again. But no matter how fast she moved, the fish easily slipped away. Discouraged and empty-handed, Tammy returned to the yacht, still upset over the failed fishing attempt as darkness fell. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise. Raising her head, she saw an unbelievable sight, a luxury cruise ship heading right toward them. Tammy immediately felt a surge of excitement. She grabbed the flare gun and desperately fired a shot toward the ship, shouting loudly for help, but the ship didn't stop. Instead, it sped past, creating massive waves that nearly capsized their yacht. Refusing to accept defeat, Tammy screamed and pleaded for help again, until the brightly lit cruise ship completely disappeared into the darkness. The cruelest thing in desperation is to be given hope and have it taken away again. At that moment, Tammy completely broke down.
Oh my God, we're gonna die out here! We're gonna die out here!
Even worse, the next morning, Richard's fever returned, and he couldn't even swallow water. His consciousness faded, and soon he fell into a deep coma. Tammy helplessly watched Richard weaken and could only sit silently by his side, praying he would survive yet again. 3 agonizing days passed, and Richard didn't wake up. Tammy gradually lost all hope. Now, there was no food left at all. Just as Tammy was about to give up, Richard miraculously woke up. He softly called her name, encouraging her to stay strong. But surprisingly, Tammy quietly said, "Richard, I'm gonna let you go now. I'll love you forever." As Tammy struggled to sit up, she suddenly realized Richard wasn't there. He was gone. In truth, Richard had drowned long ago. Everything Tammy experienced after the disaster was just a hallucination, caused by her deep grief and unwillingness to accept Richard's death. If she hadn't believed Richard was still with her, Tammy might have given up long ago. It was the only thing keeping her alive. Finally, after days of despair, Tammy accepted reality. She silently promised Richard in her heart that she would try her best to survive. Remembering Richard's encouragement, Tammy once again dove into the sea. After many attempts, she finally caught a big fish. Ignoring the taste of raw fish, Tammy forced herself to eat. She had to survive. After drifting for 41 days, the water tank was completely empty. Tammy was nearing the end of her strength. As she sat quietly meditating one day, a pigeon suddenly landed on the deck. Staring at the bird, Tammy remembered something important. She immediately grabbed her binoculars and spotted land. It was actually the Hawaiian Islands. Once again, she felt a surge of hope. Even luckier, just a short distance away, a ship was passing by. Tammy quickly grabbed her flare gun and fired toward the ship. This time, the ship didn't sail past. Instead, it turned toward her. Tammy waved her arms excitedly, shouting with all her remaining strength. Slowly, the ship drew closer. Tammy was finally rescued. When she returned to Tahiti, everything familiar reminded her instantly of Richard. They had planned to get married after this adventure, but now they were separated forever, the deepest pain of her life. The movie ended there, based on an incredible true story from 1983. Richard, only 33 years old, tragically died in Hurricane Raymond, but Tami, just 24 at the time, survived alone at sea for 41 days, showing amazing courage and determination. Even today, Tami hasn't stopped chasing her dreams. She continues to sail on, facing the cool ocean breeze, carrying her love and memories of Richard forever.